Hello and welcome to another episode of Mythologos, the podcast of all things mythological. And in this episode, I'll be introducing you to yet another scholar who I think was important, who was important to me, and important to the work I am doing with Omniad. This is going to be as brief as possible. I might return to this subject because I'm going to have to gloss over something that would take about an hour to really get into. So I'm not doing that here. That's not the purpose of the Who Was videos. It's just to give you a taste. So without further ado, let me introduce you to Roger Loomis. Now, this person, not only was it next to impossible to find any information about him, but I could only find one photograph. So it's also brief because to go into his work would be enormously complicated and long, but to get into his life, there's really not much I could find. I guess he's pretty obscure, which is a shame. But I'm giving him a shout out right here, and hopefully you will be inspired to check him out. So let's check him out. Here is the man, Roger Loomis. And he looks very stern and serious, but apparently he was a really good guy and easy to get along with and very humble. He was a really good collaborator. Almost all his work was collaborative, and the thing that he did that was most influential on me, he only edited it. It was a purely collaborative work, but he was brilliant nonetheless. So he was born in 1887 in Japan, and I have not been able to discover why that was. I believe his father was also a scholar and a teacher and was teaching in Japan, but that's as much as I could kind of intuit from what little information there is about this man's life. They moved back to America early in Roger's life and settled in Lakeville, Connecticut. Loomis got a BA from Williams College in 1909, an MA from Harvard University in 1910, and as a Rhodes Scholar, he got his B. Lit at Oxford in 1913. As far as I can tell, he taught straight through the war. He did not fight in World War I. I don't know why. Could not find any information really about what he was doing besides teaching during World War I. Of course, he won all the honorary degrees from all these different places, including where he taught for the longest period, Columbia University. And of course, as you'll see, very fitting, he had an honorary degree from the University of Wales. If anybody ever deserved an honorary degree from the University of Wales, it was Roger Loomis. In 1955 to 1956, he was a visiting professor at the University of Oxford, and he taught at the University of Illinois from 1913 to 1918. And in 1919, he went to Columbia University, where he taught for 40 years. 40 years. That is unbelievable. He was a member of the English faculty, and he held an emeritus position there from 1958 until his death in 1966. He was married twice. His first wife died. Both his wives were also Arthurian scholars and medievalists, and they both contributed to his work, which is pretty cool. He was a member of the International Arthurian Society and president of the American branch from 1948 to 1963. Now, what's interesting is in 1948, he went to the very first meeting of the International Arthurian Society. Also there was Eugene Vinaver. Eugene Vinaver edited the Caxton Mallory. So if you know your Arthur, Thomas Mallory wrote Le Morte d'Arthur, and that was published by William Caxton. Vinaver actually discovered the page proofs. The original page proofs for Le Morte d'Arthur that had just been lost for centuries. And it actually showed that the original sequence differed from the version that we have significantly. There were also things that were changed and deleted or added. And pretty much the Caxton Mallory edited by Vinever it's the like essential text if you're going to study Mallory and Mallory's contribution to the Arthurian tradition. So it's pretty cool that Roger Loomis and Eugene Vinever were at the first International Arthurian Society meeting in 1948. That's pretty wicked, kind of like a Justice League moment or something. And he was a member of the Modern Language Association, the Medieval Academy of America, the Modern Humanities Research Association, the American Humanist Association, and there's a bunch I left off here because I just too much. He was a busy man, and he died in 1966 in Connecticut. And he was most famous in his life for connecting the Arthurian tradition to the Celtic tradition. And there'd been some rumblings along those lines previously. Famously, there was the book, I always forget this woman's name, Jessie West or Westing, but she wrote the book From Ritual to Romance, which forms the germ of the appendix to T.S. Eliot's The Wasteland. And later on, he said he'd never read the book, but he probably did read the book. He was very cheeky about the appendix. He always said it was too short to publish as its own volume, so he added the notes in the back. But there's lots of evidence that's not true and that he did read the book. But that's very amateurish compared to the work that Loomis did. But this is what he was most famous for, and this is how he most affected me. Is I was unaware of that connection. And so we're going to get into it and just take a look at some of his books. And I'm just going to tell you some stories about these books and recommend them. So my journey began here in 1992 or something. It was very early 90s. And I saw this book in the public library, and I took it out without even looking at it. I just took it home, and I opened it up, and I started reading. And this is a collection of essays. It covers an enormous period of time, pretty much the entire history of the Arthurian tradition, all the way up into the 20th century. And early on, there's a chapter on the Welsh triads, and I knew nothing about Wales whatsoever. All I knew about Wales was that David Macaulay television special about how castles were designed. He set his fictional castle in medieval Wales. That was everything I knew about Wales. I didn't know anything about Wales. But the purpose of the triads was that the bards, who could recite these massive epics of hundreds and hundreds of lines from memory, they had various mnemonic techniques of memorization. And people are most familiar with Ogham, because that was popularized by Robert Graves in his wonderful and completely insane book, The White Goddess. But this was another system by which an epic could be remembered, by reducing it to 3 lines. And that's all that's left. Are these these collections of 3 lines. There's nothing else. And, I was reading this until I got to one line, which I still remember, let's see if I could remember precisely. I think it was, forget it, I can't. It mentions 2 characters who would become famous knights in the Arthurian tradition. Maybe it was just Arthur and Kay. But let's just say Arthur. But this one line was Arthur and Kay slaying dog heads by the hundreds. And I was, what the hell? And I looked at the footnote, and it's like, these might be dog-headed monsters, or they might be savages wearing, wolf heads, like helmets. We don't know. But as I was reading this section, I started to understand the synthesis that had happened. And this is what I'd been looking for. I was looking for some place to start to connect the abstraction of thought, the distillation of those abstractions into concrete concepts that can be turned into images and language and narrative, and then injected throughout culture, and then mimetically copied and pasted and carried on. And this is the core of my thinking about the mode of narrative that we call myth. This is the very center of it. And this was the first time that I found something that I was holding in my hands that I could read and understand, that gave me a doorway into it. And I remember I just shot up out of the chair I was sitting in like I had received an electrical shock. And I was just hopping around, excited, like, oh my God, this is it, I found it. And indeed, I had found it. And this is really Loomis's great contribution, that he was able to give an entry into this idea of how these things are synthesized over time. And as I said, there was already an awareness that there was some connection between Celtic tradition and Arthurian tradition, but he really worked on it. And he brought other people in, and they worked on it too. And this is pretty much the standard approach now. And at the time, it was not the standard approach. But I recommend this book so heartily. Arthurian literature in the Middle Ages is by far the single best book on the Arthurian tradition that I've ever read by anyone. So yeah, if you're only going to read one Roger Loomis, this is the book that you want to read. And this started me off on a whole odyssey. It's almost like the whole shebang didn't really begin until I found this book. And I was just reading it passively, like the intro and the first two essays, and like, this is nice. This is interesting. It's a good book. And then I hit that chapter, and it was just like electrical shock, and I was off to the races. Now, this brings back memories. This was the precise copy that was in the library, and that I actually later bought at a library book sale for like $0.25 or something. And I had this for years. I don't have it anymore, but just seeing that cover brings back memories. Like, I can smell that book. I can feel that book. I could find things in that book if you handed it to me right now. So this, I went from Arthurian literature in the Middle Ages directly to this. And I read this simultaneously while reading Mircea Eliade's book on shamanism. And I can tell you, these two books together, this is the foundation. We're really building the foundation of my entire approach here. This is the soil that Omniad grows out of. This is what I'm trying to say. This is what I'm trying to tell you people, is about this synthesis and the progression from cognitive to conscious function, and abstraction to concrete concept to functional cultural utility. And this is kind of the thing that's been lost, that doesn't get related to myth anymore. But anyway, this is a fantastic book. And the point that his example, this is where I can't go into detail, but I may well do a whole big video just on this. But he really was the person. Like I said, there were some rumblings beforehand, but he really was the first person to put real thought into the idea that the Holy Grail was not only rooted in the Christian tradition, but it was rooted in pagan Celtic tradition. And that the Grail, yes, it was the cup that Christ drank from, or it was the cup that caught Christ's blood when he was stabbed by a Roman spear. But it was also one of these Celtic cauldrons. There are all these, throughout Celtic narrative, traditional narrative, there are these cauldrons that have, magical powers. They can bring the dead to life and cure illness. But what he focused on was the ability to create food and treasure. It's interesting that he didn't focus on the healing and the resurrection qualities, because you would automatically think that's the thing that would connect it directly to the Christ narrative. But it brings it back to the wasteland narrative. It is a regenerative narrative either way. By replacing want with plenty, that is a regenerative narrative. The reflowering of the wilderness, of the wasteland. But anyway, it's very well worth reading. It's very important stuff. And again, this is the standard line now. And most people don't know where it came from. He's where it came from. I mean, he was the one who got on it and stayed on it and wrote 10 books on it. This was really his baby, his work. And here is the book where this was the next book that I read, was The Grail from Celtic Myth to Christian Symbol. And this is where he particularly connects it to a narrative that's in the Welsh Mabinogion. And as I say, I knew nothing about Wales. And then I became a Welshophile, and I've been obsessed with Wales and medieval Wales and Welsh ballads. What we think of as the ballad tradition, which now exists as god-awful, terrible country pop music. But it's the end. It's like the absolute death end of the greatest tradition in music that we ever had, that goes back to like before the Epic of Gilgamesh, and all we have left now are these horrible pop songs that are written by computers, I think. But anyway, if you go back, look at the American ballad tradition, say the last big event was Bob Dylan, and it was like before that was Woody Guthrie, and before that we had like minstrel shows, and then like before that is like the Southern Appalachian tradition. That line, you're gonna trace it back to Ireland, then to Scotland, then to England, but really where you're gonna find all the plots for all the ballads is in the Mabinogion, in the Welsh Mabinogion. And that is a straight line of influence from medieval Wales all the way, unfortunately, to the modern day. But that's the continuity of the ballad tradition. And these are things I knew nothing about until I found Roger Loomis and started reading these books. And I followed up with my own research because I had to know more. And this is how I discovered these things. And he also dealt directly with the Arthurian romance. Now, the romance is a part of the tradition, but it's also a genre from a specific time, from the Middle Ages, from the upper Middle Ages, the 14th, 15th, early 16th century. You get your romances, and this is where we eventually get Malory from that. And, of course, I read this too. It's a good book. And he did various anthologies of translations, and I also had this book that I had to get rid of. I had to get rid of all my books. I think this went like 11 years ago when I had to sell my whole library. But in this book is how I discovered Arthurian de Troyes, who comes before Malory, and was a French poet who contributed to the Arthurian tradition. And what I remember is you have to keep in mind, I was like 21 years old. I had quit high school and gotten a GED. I was self-educated. My pronunciation of things was not good. And what I remember, I was in the heat of this. It was like 1993, I guess. I was really in the heat of this, and I was actually working in Princeton, where I was cleaning up textbooks that had been returned, and I was working with this man whose name I forget, who he was in like his 60s. He came from Trinidad, and he was smaller than me, and him and his wife, they were both tiny little hobbit people. They're short, like a full head shorter than me, these tiny little hobbit people from Trinidad, and they had both had like big careers. I think he had been like in investment banking, and she had been some sort of attorney or law firm or something. They were educated like out the wazoo. They were highly educated, had multiple languages. And as we were passing the books along, cleaning them up, erasing the student signatures and, things like that, erasing the underlining, we're just sitting at a table doing this quite leisurely, and they'd start talking about the subjects, and it became clear to me that these were highly intelligent, well-educated people. But I was talking about things that I was reading, and I kept mentioning Cretian de Troyes. And I just always remember it was this little man from Trinidad. He said, I believe it's pronounced Arthurian de Troyes. And he knew all about it, and we got into like very big conversations about medieval literature and romances, and it was so cute. His wife wasn't interested in that kind of thing, and she just sort of laughed at us boys talking about knights and grails and dragons and all this stuff. So yeah, I'll always connect Roger Loomis to that moment. I can still picture us at that table and him saying very politely, as many people had to do. I remember I used to pronounce Jung like for years and years because I was self-educated, and someone said, I believe his mother called him Jung, which but yeah, I believe it's pronounced Arthurian de Troyes. So that's Roger Loomis in a nutshell. Well worth reading, very important, and you're not going to hear about these people anywhere else. You get on YouTube and it's the same stuff over and over and over again. So I'm trying to bring to you people that you haven't heard of before. Things you haven't heard a million times. And I know I could be getting more hits. I could be doing this or that. I could be more popular, but I'm not interested in that. I'd rather bring you the things that interest me, that I think will interest you as well. So that's all for this episode. Thank you for listening. I'll be back soon with another episode of Mythologos, and I am preparing some pretty thoroughgoing stuff for Tux Lives, involving LaTeX and BibTeX and Emacs and maybe even Pandoc. But that stuff has to be prepared. I have to learn it enough to demonstrate it without making a million mistakes before I can do those videos, because I'm a beginner. But that's all for now. I will see you soon, and until then, good luck to you.